Maharishi Mahesh Yogi became guru to some of the biggest names on earth.
My opinion is that he's the most powerful person that I've ever met.
He made meditation a household word and is still hoping to save the world.
He's an entrepreneur whose business is spiritual regeneration, and he knows what he's talking about.
In February 1968, the most famous pop group on earth boarded a plane to India. The Beatles were en route to visit the man who had become their guru in all things. And they weren't the only ones.
Landed in India as the sun was coming up, and I'd never been to India before. And the sun was coming up, and I'm stepping off the plane, and I'm thinking, wow, this place is really here. I mean, I'd never sensed a place having that kind of vibration. Good vibration, by the way.
The man everybody wanted to see was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a 51-year-old spiritual leader who'd been teaching the world to meditate for more than 10 years.
Far from the noise and pace of city life, in the cool, clear air of Rishikesh, North India, Kathy News reports from the meditation retreat of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the man who, through transcendental meditation, is currently bringing peace of mind to the Beatles.
They showed up. Scientists, pop stars showed up because he was spontaneous, he was creative, he was joyful, and at the same time he was detached. It was very interesting to be around him.
In early 1968, Maharishi's ashram on the shores of the river Ganges became a mecca for the stars. They were all hoping for the sort of answers that had eluded them up until now.
They were serious students of Transcendental Meditation and serious students of Maharishi. And they were there to accomplish their own evolution.
The stars had moved out of the limelight that defined them and into a very different way of life. A daily routine is laid out by Maharishi himself.
Meditation in the morning, and then meeting me to understand the experiences of meditation. And then lunch, and then meeting me again afternoon, and then meeting me in the night after their evening meditation.
For the Beatles, Mike Love and Donovan, staying with Maharishi was a rare opportunity to live a long, forgotten, normal life.
There were 60 meditators there from around the world, and they were very friendly with everybody. They were very accessible. They didn't look any different than anyone else sitting around at the ashram.
But they were. Here were some of the biggest talents in the world of music. And as the course intensified, so did the creativity of the fledgling meditators.
When Maharishi met John one night, Maharishi said to him, "And so how is the meditation going?" And John said, "Well, Maharishi, when I'm deep in meditation, I start writing songs. What should I do?" And Maharishi said, "John, when you are deep in meditation and you feel a song, come out of the meditation, write down the song. After you have written the song, go back to the meditation." And John said, "You mean that simple?" And Maharishi said, "That's simple."
The Beatles wrote more than 30 songs in Rishikesh. Their White Album was testimony to this unusually creative spurt. Maharishi's ashram was proving to be a very productive and harmonious place.
I remember Paul coming down to the breakfast table one morning. "Listen to this, Mike." He wrote back in the USSR with a sort of a Beach Boys style. And I said, "Paul, what you got to do is put all the girls about Russia, the Moscow, Ukraine, Georgia, all that." And he did, and I was there, and it was just the two of us, and so we had some pretty neat talks and great memories.
Maharishi is a hurdy-gurdy man. He comes singing your songs of love. Beatles are hurdy-gurdy men. They come singing your songs of love. I am the hurdy-gurdy man.
this star-studded burst of creativity produced some of the best-loved classics of our time. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi had set the stage for a very unusual kind of gig. One evening, he led his prize students for a rare trip out on the river Ganges.
And the night was filled with stars, and the barge went out on the water, and the yogi was at one end of the barge, and two chanters were at the other. And as we went out on the barge, the stars opened up. And somebody looked up and said, "Look, Maharishi, a miracle." And across the heavens was a great glowing light, which slowly curved around the earth. And then somebody a little bit more practical said, "It's a satellite." So we went, oh.
The Beatles made Maharishi the most famous guru on earth and put Transcendental Meditation firmly on the map. But Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's quest to spiritually regenerate the world had only just begun. The second phase of his mission to save mankind would be even more ambitious than the first. Defined by advanced meditation techniques like yogic flying and even a foray into politics based on natural law, Maharishi's drive for peace on earth shows no signs of slowing down. Transcendental meditation is an age-old system with roots in the Vedic tradition of India. It's a method that lay dormant for hundreds of years. A spiritual practice that, according to its devotees, can be learned by anybody, anywhere.
You're given a mantra and taught how to use the mantra.
The role of the mantra is to interfere with the thinking process so that the thinking process gets abstract.
You just repeat it to yourself over and over again inward. And as you do, it takes you inward, and you go inward and down and down.
It's a vehicle. It's like taking a taxi to get somewhere, and when you get there, you don't need the taxi anymore.
Transcendental really means just going beyond surface thought to deeper levels of thought, and deeper, 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 and then beyond thought to this field of being.
And when you come out of meditation, you do feel refreshed, like really refreshed. You feel energized.
Transcendental meditation is a technique that wakes up the intelligence in the brain, wakes up the intelligence in the body, so that we are as healthy and creative and fulfilled as we can be.
Little is known about the early life of the man who brought TM to the West. Mahesh Prasad was born in central India on the 12th of January 1918. And it was soon clear he had a spiritual calling that he couldn't ignore.
Apparently he grew up in a business family, family of traders, but he was not drawn to his family's profession. And at a very young age, even as a young boy, before he was a teenager, he started to have a longing for spiritual attainment, for enlightenment.
When one of India's 4 spiritual leaders visited his local town, Mahesh knew immediately that he'd found what he was searching for. Known as Guru Dev, or Great Master, this was a hugely revered figure in a deeply spiritualized country. Years later, Mahesh would recall his early impressions of Guru Dev.
Everything regarding him was great, simple, innocent, complete. He was that perfect, divine personality.
I think there's a yearning in India, growing up in that culture, there's a yearning, there's a longing for higher meaning, purpose, enlightenment. It's part of our tradition. You know, it goes back to the time of Buddha 2,500 years ago.
For Mahesh, meeting Guru Dev was a pivotal moment. A chance to align himself with one of India's most respected spiritual teachers.
Traditionally, if one is seeking spiritual consciousness or seeking enlightenment, one goes to a guru and one becomes the chela or disciple of the guru, and you do everything that the guru wants.
Mahesh attained the discipleship he longed for, and he soon became an indispensable member of Guru Dev's ashram.
He was his secretary, his personal secretary, and he started working for Gurudev, doing whatever he could in order to attune his mind to Gurudev's mind. He wanted to learn as much as possible from Gurudev.
When the great master died on the 20th of May, 1953, his disciple of 13 years traveled high into the Himalayas for some solitude and contemplation. It was time for Mahesh to take stock.
It's like Christ going for 40 days into the desert to confront all aspects of his own self and to listen to his deeper consciousness.
After about 2 years alone, Mahesh traveled to southern India. It was a journey that would change his life forever. The former disciple now practiced an ancient method of meditation taught to him by Guru Dev. It was a simple technique, and Mahesh discovered he knew something people wanted to hear about.
He didn't invent it. Transcendental meditation is a name that he gave it. It's a form of mantra meditation. He also modified it actually to some extent so that it wasn't as complicated as the traditional forms of meditation were.
Mahesh began speaking to groups. He explained that you didn't have to be a monk to gain benefits from this form of meditation.
When they heard Maharishi say that meditation was easy and effortless to do and produced immediate effect, then everyone wanted to learn, so then he started to teach. It was just that spontaneous. He never intended to do it. It just happened like that.
As word got around that Guru Dev's former disciple was sharing something new, interest grew. Mahesh was now introduced to eager audiences as Maharishi, or great teacher. And he was soon taking southern India by storm with this transcendental meditation technique. It wouldn't be long before the world was at his feet. By the late 1950s, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, as he'd become known, was converting untold numbers to meditation. And now he was going global. What Maharishi wanted was to spiritually regenerate the world. It was an unbelievably ambitious plan.
I think he took a huge leap in his personal evolution. He saw himself as a teacher. He had complete confidence that that was his mission. And he saw himself as a redeemer in many ways.
Maharishi wanted to save the world with his meditation technique, and he soon headed west to do just that. In the spring of 1959, he landed in Los Angeles and began lecturing at low-key venues around the city. A small band of enthusiasts took on the task of supporting the holy man from India. Among them was the Olson family, who offered up their LA house as a place for Maharishi to stay.
That first day that Maharishi came, it was a Sunday, my one day to play, and we had to dress up in our Sunday best. The house was cleaned completely, and then we started waiting, and waiting, and waiting.
433 Harvard Boulevard was about to become more than just a family home.
I hear a car door slam, and Maharishi walked up to us. We gave him the flowers. He said, "Very good," and he walked into our home and walked into my life.
As the Olsons adjusted to life with a yogi in the house, their home became Maharishi's first transcendental meditation center in the West.
Around 10 in the morning, he would come downstairs. There was a little study, and he would be in the study, and he would meet people for interviews, for learning transcendental meditation. And then after the interview, he would work on different writing projects.
Among the Californians queuing up outside was Jerry Jarvis and his wife, Deborah. Jarvis's initiation into Transcendental Meditation would be a life-changing moment.
So we were initiated, and that was it. I mean, it was magnificent. All my desire for spiritual development was fulfilled in that first, fulfilled in the sense that I knew that this was it. And I had a deep inner experience.
And the newly initiated Jarvis wanted to help. He became one of Maharishi's closest aides and gained a rare insight into the early days of a phenomenon that was going to change lives worldwide.
His mission was constant, to spread this teaching, to make it available to the entire world. At that time, the population of the world was about 2 to 3 billion, I think.
With that many people to teach, Maharishi needed to move fast. There were now hundreds of meditators on the west coast of America, and it was time to take Transcendental Meditation on the road again. Between 1958 and 1965, Guru Dev's former disciple circumnavigated the globe 5 times. He opened centers in all the countries he visited and remained the hands-on leader of a growing organization.
He used to do a lot of teaching himself in those days. Like when I was instructed, Maharishi taught 100 people in a day, and I was, one of the people, and everywhere he would go, he would just keep teaching, keep checking the meditation, guiding the people, giving lectures, holding courses.
Maharishi had to learn how to talk in terms that Western society would understand. And so we understood TM as stress management.
He knew that he had something of ultimate value to any other human being. And his whole teaching was based on that. All the lectures that he gave, wherever he went, was all based on that.
But Maharishi couldn't teach the whole world to meditate alone. Work began on a new academy on the shores of the river Ganges in India. The idea was to train thousands of teachers within a 3-year period. Another incredibly ambitious plan.
The beauty of becoming a teacher, and particularly for young people during the 60s, was that you didn't have to tell anybody to change their way of life. There were no do's and don'ts that we were teaching.
As teachers trained, there was time for other things. Maharishi wrote his first book and began a translation of a sacred Hindu text called the Bhagavad Gita. He encouraged scientists to examine his simple meditation technique. It was a very modern perspective on an age-old Indian tradition.
He wanted to do something that would apply to every single religion, tradition, culture, language of everybody who's ever born in the world, now and in the future, that could help them. And so that is a universal level of knowledge, not that I belong to this one channel or this one tradition. Universality has always been Maharishi's approach.
And Maharishi understood how best to promote his cause. He instinctively knew how to handle a photo opportunity, something that would come in handy during the making of a documentary about his life. Filmmaker Alan Waite spent many months with Maharishi. He soon discovered that the man becoming known as the Giggling Guru had quite a head for heights.
He fancied himself as kind of a pilot, sort of. So one of the meditators at Squaw Valley, when we were making the film, his father was Bill Lear, who invented the Learjet. So I said to him, I said, can you get your father to bring that thing up here? I'd take Maharishi out there, and his eyes are as big as teacups. He became like a little kid. Oh, he was so excited. So we put him on the plane, and we fly around, and Bill's talking to him, and he's sitting in the co-pilot seat. And he is so excited. This Learjet was just a thrill. And I said, well, Maharishi, we're getting ready to land, and I've got cameras down there they're going to be recording our landing. So he gets his flowers and he starts waving in the window his flowers as we're landing on the tarmac.
Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was flying high. And he was about to be catapulted to international superstardom. The 1960s was a changing world. A raging counterculture was creating a whole new way of life. It was a wave of flower power that seemed to embrace Maharishi in every way.
He looked like a flower child. He had a spirit and a way about him that was non-threatening, childlike in many ways. So yes, he wanders onto that stage and he's dressed for the part, and he has all the moves.
In this generation, the mind is much more mature than before. Mature? More mature than before. The youth now wants a way out of suffering, wants to live life in bliss consciousness.
Among those looking for something more were the four most famous faces in the world. The Beatles were Britain's biggest export. They'd heard about TM from George Harrison's girlfriend, Pattie Boyd. On the 24th of August, 1967, Britain's Fab Four trooped off to London's Hilton Hotel to hear Maharishi speak. A few days later, they were sharing a train carriage en route to Maharishi's centre at Bangor in Wales. But the peaceful weekend was soon overshadowed by tragic news. The sudden death of the Beatles' manager, Brian Epstein, was a devastating blow. The world's press wanted to know what advice Maharishi had offered the shell-shocked band.
He told us not to get overwhelmed by grief, and to whatever thoughts we have of Brian, to keep them happy, because any thoughts we have of him will travel to him wherever he will.
Had he ever met Mr. Epstein?
No, but he was looking forward to meeting him.
Tomorrow?
Yes.
In just a few days, Maharishi had become guru to the biggest names on earth. And where the Beatles led, others soon followed.
The difference was we'd give lectures to 500, 600, and then the Beatles started, and then we were giving lectures to 1 and 2,000. You know, it increased the interest immediately.
Back at the Olsons in Los Angeles, Maharishi was in demand. The Beatles weren't the only big names turning up on his doorstep.
I'd had a little joint just before I got out of the limo, so I was feeling kind of mellow. All along one wall of this not great large house in Beverly Hills were 7 hairy guys, like a rock band. I didn't recognize them. Anyway, in I went. It was dark, it was moody, and there was Maharishi. And Maharishi looked at me in the half-light, and he gave me the mantra. And he said, do this, relax, repeat it silently inside. And then suddenly, something extraordinary happened, which is what I wanted. I started falling down, 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 down. And as I felt relief, 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 relax, relax. After a time which I couldn't measure, I heard him say, now open your eyes. And then an aide came in and said, Maharishi, it's time for the next initiation. And Maharishi said, and who is that? And the aide said, they are called the Grateful Dead. And I laughed, and Maharishi laughed. And he said, they should not call themselves the Grateful Dead. They should call themselves the Grateful Living.
As the stars lined up, Maharishi moved center stage. In early 1968, the Beatles and other pop luminaries like Donovan and Mike Love enrolled on a teacher training course at his academy in Rishikesh. This was undreamt of publicity for Maharishi and his organization.
Maharishi knew full well that people who had the attention of the popular culture at the time, people are going to be interested. What are the Beatles? What in the world are they doing in India? What is Mike Love doing there? So yeah, it's going to create a little bit of interest.
It was an extraordinary get-together, and one that Maharishi was determined to capture on film. He even directed proceedings himself.
We all showed up for a photo session with Maharishi, and he sent us all back to get dressed in our finery, in our fancy dress, which we did. We all went back and pulled something out that was more colorful.
That picture was like a recruiting poster. That was a very carefully staged photograph. The Maharishi directed the entire staging of the picture, who was to sit where, and then he would talk to the camera people and tell them to take it from what angle. So it was very much in his mind to make an iconic image.
But within weeks, things went wrong. Without warning, the Beatles announced they were leaving. Filmmaker Alan Waite remembers the moment the band broke the news to Maharishi.
Paul McCartney and I think George Harrison came in and said, we'd like to speak to Maharishi for a minute. Maharishi got up and took the two Beatles into another room. I don't know what they said. They were there about 20 minutes or so and talking, and they came out of that meeting and they shook hands and said, we're leaving, our limos are here, and we're leaving the ashram, and I said, met you and goodbye.
John Lennon would later recount allegations that Maharishi had made advances on one of the young female guests. Rumors that seemed to have originated from within the Beatles camp itself.
I won't mention names, but there was a friend of the Beatles who was disturbed that the Beatles were so seriously intent on the program. He generated some rumors, and the rumors got to John and particularly, and it made them upset. They thought Maharishi was something less than they thought he was. So they were upset.
Maharishi, who had taken a vow of celibacy nearly 3 decades earlier, was unfazed by the new developments.
I think I would love them, whatever they say.
Why do you think they made such a statement?
I'm unaware completely why.
Do you think they'll...
I only extend my love to them.
And a former Beatle would one day extend his. In the late 1980s, one of Maharishi's deputies received an unexpected request. George Harrison wanted to meet up. He had something he needed to get off his chest.
We had a private meeting with Maharishi, George Harrison, and myself, where George apologized for the behavior of the Beatles in the 60s, and Maharishi refused to acknowledge that they had behaved inappropriately. He said, the Beatles created such music for the world that I thought they were angels, and I would never be angry with them, I would never be upset with them, no matter what John said.
Maharishi's sojourn into the world of international superstardom was a defining moment. But he'd been in the spotlight long enough. It was now time to move on. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's uncomfortable brush with celebrity was a turning point. The Beatles' former guru had experienced firsthand how erratic fame can be. He now moved away from center stage.
He was afraid that this could become a cult of personality, which Maharishi did not want at all. The Beatles had learned TM, and all the people they influenced learned TM. But it wasn't a sector of society that was taken very seriously. And if TM was really going to spread to become a global phenomenon, Maharishi felt it would have to be on the basis of the leadership of society.
And all that seemed possible when Maharishi was invited to appear on the Merv Griffin Show in September 1975. Griffin was a serious and respected talk show host. He also Transcendental Meditation. Alongside Griffin were other converts, all members of America's elite. This was just the caliber of endorsement Maharishi was after.
In my first meditations, I started jumping. I thought, oh, now I've got another time to jump. But then what you find is that that is the stress leaving, and after a period of a few weeks of meditation, it's all gone.
The effect was clearing away the middlemen and misunderstandings and what they may have heard, and they go, oh, wow, Maharishi is great, and Merv Griffin does it, and these people do it. So it was very powerful.
Thank you, Maharishi, very much.
Maharishi's drive for validation was gaining momentum.
I hope I'll see you before you leave.
From doctors to politicians, Transcendental Meditation was now a very respectable way to relax.
What happened to me was I had this anger, real anger, and out of frustration and not wanting to be in certain situations in my life, within 2 weeks of meditating, this anger, without trying, it lifted away, gone. So it's so freeing. The negativity lifts away, and that's where the enjoyment of life starts soaring.
I was feeling healthier physically. I was more productive, I was more creative, and I was at peace, so everything improved.
But Maharishi needed more than just testimony. For nearly 2 decades, he'd been encouraging scientific validation for his simple technique. His drive for recognition now moved into high gear.
It was he who encouraged, Maharishi himself, who encouraged all the scientific research on Transcendental Meditation. He didn't want to leave it as a metaphysical, mystical knowledge. He wanted the technique of meditation scientifically understood, scientifically scrutinized.
These are the electroencephalograph patterns of a subject who's practicing Transcendental Meditation.
Scores of tests were carried out, and the results looked good. From insomnia to high blood pressure, TM seemed to have the answers. Between 1966 and 1976, over 1 million people learned the simple technique. And as TM gained momentum, Maharishi got busy with something new. He was developing an advanced form of meditation, another ancient practice that began its life in the West behind closed doors.
I remember when yogic flying was first introduced in the Transcendental Meditation movement back in the 70s. It was top secret at the time. The people who did it practiced it in rooms with sheets hung over the windows and guards posted at the door, and you weren't supposed to come in. And I was living in a room above the flying room at the time, and I snuck down, and I saw people hopping up and down on foam mats.
It's meditation with activity. It's the depth of experience of inward silence through meditation while the body is dynamically moving. The body's actually trying to fly, hopping and spontaneously lifting up.
Initially, the experience was just totally bewildering and amazing, because you were meditating and you were practicing some sutras, you know, which are like mantras, and suddenly your body would lift off the ground.
My mind says, fly. My body says, okay, and off I go. When you walk, do you think about it? Same mechanism, but we're simply using a different principle. We're a little bit outside the box of walking. We're looking into the laws of nature that are affecting gravity, and the body is responding.
yogic flying was unveiled to the world in July 1986. But this was far from the aeronautics display the world's press had been promised. It was a characteristic exaggeration by Maharishi, and one that detracted from the credibility he'd worked so hard to achieve.
We hope to give you a glimpse today.
He loved to make outrageous claims, and I think he did it on purpose because it did invite ridicule, but it also invited a lot of attention in the media and the press. And I once actually asked him, I said, why do you exaggerate so much? And he said, well, if I want somebody to go 10 miles, I tell them to go 100 miles. If I want to tell somebody to go 100 miles, I tell them to go 1,000 miles. Because if you tell them to go 1 mile, they won't even get up.
Maharishi was diversifying fast. And the man who'd made meditation a household word was stepping back. He'd opened his own university in the Midwestern state of Iowa. This would soon be the location for a very new world vision. The world is seeing less of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. A journey that started on the west coast of America in 1959 has ended in a tiny Dutch village called Vlodrop. Maharishi's move to the Netherlands in 1990 marked the end of the close contact that defined his first 3 decades in the West.
What we are left with, for many of us, is the memories, the good times that we had with him, the love that many of us felt for him. However, many of us have kept going on those memories now for many, many years. And what is left of Maharishi is a kind of icon.
Today, the closest you're likely to get to the man who's been spiritually regenerating the world is via his 24-hour television channel. But Maharishi remains the master of the worldwide organization he has created.
He pretty much controls his environment. He is the overall leader and boss of his self and his environment and what he wants to do and what he wants to say and how he wants to say it and how he wants it known. Nothing happens unless he sanctions it.
In 1992, Maharishi sanctioned his organization's first foray into politics. The Natural Law Party was based on the idea that natural law is an overriding principle that governs the universe, and that all our problems arise when we act against it.
This is not a party of the far left or the far right, more of the far out.
The International Party claimed it could realign humanity with the help of techniques like TM and yogic flying. Maharishi's ancient Indian wisdom was being put to the vote.
Natural Law Party was a brilliant idea, an exhausting idea. It was an idea of taking basically the knowledge directly to the people through the electoral process.
But it was an idea that didn't work. The party won just 0.4% of the vote in the UK's 1992 general election. And Hagelin received fewer than 84,000 votes in America.
People won't risk a vote for a third-party candidate. They're too busy trying to get the lesser of evils defeated than to risk using a vote on a third-party candidate that can't win.
Having run the political gauntlet, Maharishi now focuses on the work that's been occupying him for the past 20 years. The former guru to the stars is systematically reviving the ancient teaching of India called the Vedas. From healthcare to education, he's been coming up with an alternative way for us to live. 40 guiding principles determined by the natural law that defines his world. You'll find what he has in mind at Vedic City, Iowa. Maharishi's utopia for the 21st century.
It's a city that's completely built in accord with natural law. That means even the architecture is aligned with nature. It's aligned with the rising sun in the morning, eastwardly facing homes.
But Maharishi's vision for the perfect place to live took a while to catch on. Huge meditation domes and a 40-foot high tower of invincibility were more than some local residents could cope with.
The preachers of the Baptist church and the Lutheran church would say, and they're gathering, these Satan worshippers are gathering in the dome. And we go, us? Wait a minute, who are you talking about? Because many of our people who meditate are also going to church.
The city has its own administration and even its own currency. In the local school, Transcendental Meditation is part of the day-to-day routine. As just one of Maharishi's many worldwide schemes, Vedic City raises the inevitable questions about the funding of such ambitious projects. According to the TM organization, money is raised through donations and course fees. At $2,500, learning Transcendental Meditation isn't cheap. Maharishi remains ambivalent about his finances.
I remember asking him, he was planning some huge project which was going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And so somebody in the audience, in this inner circle said, where's the money going to come from? And he said, the money will come from wherever it is at the moment.
Maharishi's blueprint for humanity has polarized many of the followers who help facilitate the growth of TM in the West. In the drive for diversification, has the great teacher and his organization lost sight of the individuals they set out to instruct?
When I came back in 2000, TM was almost an afterthought. I felt that the movement and Maharishi just really weren't interested in teaching meditation that much anymore, and instead they had this vast array of products and services pretty much for every aspect of human life.
But according to Maharishi, the first 50 years teaching people how to meditate were just a warm-up. He now has a new formula for spiritually regenerating the world. Incredibly, some studies seem to indicate that group practice of yogic flying could cut back violence in towns and cities.
In some of these areas, they were finding that the crime went down. And so they found out that they determined that the square root of 1% of a population is sufficient to practice TM, and you would have an effect on the environment, on the statistics of violent crime.
The idea that meditation can save the world, even if just a few of us do it, is Maharishi's boldest declaration yet. But is the man who has spent his life working out a formula for peace promising too much?
That's a danger with all so-called visionaries. They always promise more than they can deliver. And that leads to a lot of disappointment. I don't, at the same time, totally disagree with him in that I think if there were enough people living in a state of awareness where they went beyond their personal egos and started to experience in an authentic way that domain of awareness which is universal, that we would have more peace in the world.
Maharishi Mahesh Yogi set out to spiritually regenerate the world. 6 million people now practice his simple meditation technique. Today, his quest for peace on earth is more ambitious than ever.
He never thought small. Most of the time, we think in Western society of how to survive in the box. I don't think Maharishi ever had a box. He has constantly lived outside the boundaries of the box.
When filmmaker Alan Waite asked Maharishi in 1968 what he would like to be remembered for, Maharishi replied, nothing.
With archaeology as our guide, we can now relive the biblical times. Where did these ancient societies